So today I'm going to talk about things that will make me lose interest. Uh, Originally I was going to title this, what will make me drop a book, but I think that I'm going to instead in this video talk about things that, and this is not just specific books because I don't want to, again, dump on anybody in particular, but there are some things that creatives do, that authors do, that movie makers do, that just kind of, I guess the best way to say it is that it just they do things that just don't work, and or at least don't work for me, and why it causes, why it would be the kind of thing that I would lose interest in your project or whatever it is that you happen to be doing. And now, I don't know, I mean, this is not intended to be I'm not trying to call anybody out or be negative or anything like that, but I just, it's one of those things that I think is worth discussing. Um, but in any case, I know I have I have a short list of things. There may be other things, but at least for now, these are my the five kinds of things that will kind of make me lose interest in a project. It's like the first one is unclear motivations. If I can't tell what your character is doing, what's going on, what the whole point of the story is, and then it's going to be hard for me to want to continue reading or watching, because if I mean I kind of want to know what's going on at least by the first half of the book. If I reach the midpoint and I still don't understand why your characters are doing what they do, what the point of their world is, what the thrust of the story is, if I can't explain that to myself or to other people, then I think that the book or the movie or whatever it is, it just does not work. Because when I do book reviews, usually by the time I've read the first quarter, I usually feel like I have enough of a grasp to kind of work on the first four sections of my review, which of course is like a general screenshot of what the book is, the premise, the characters, and the setting. And it's like, if I can understand all of these things, preferably by the first act, but if not the first act, at least by the first half of the book, then it's a book that I can get behind and at least will enjoy enough to finish reading, or a movie I'll enjoy enough to finish watching, even if it's not something I would watch or read again. But if I've reached the midpoint and I still don't understand what's going on, it is very hard for me to want to invest the energy to finish the book or movie. And, part of the reason for that is that I think the purpose of most books is to make you care about the characters, to make you invested in the world. And if you don't understand what's going on, it's very hard to do that, because you can't connect it to anything in your experience. You can't tell whether or not this character, should be rooted for, whether or not they're supposed to be, how they fit into things, all things of that nature. And it makes it very hard to just, I guess, really invest into the story. And it's a mistake that I think I've encountered in at least a couple of examples that I'll quickly go over. It's like, I remember watching a movie, and I tell people about this all the time sometimes. It's a movie, and I don't remember when it was. It was called Ronin, and it had Robert De Niro in it, and they spend the whole movie chasing after this briefcase. And I watched this movie, and I expected them to tell me at some point what was in the briefcase. And as I recall, you never find out what it is. And, they talk about in the trailer, it's like the girl has betrayed us, and all these kind of things. They spend all this movie trying to chase after this briefcase. And then, you never find out what's in it. And it just infuriated me so much that I always regard it as one of those movies that it's just like, unclear motivations. It's like, I don't know why I should care. It's like, what's in the briefcase? What does it mean to them? What does it mean to anybody? It's like, it just was like, it was like you were watching those people chasing after this briefcase, and it was just, I don't understand why this is important. And as a result of that, I couldn't apply any gravity to the events of the movie. I couldn't apply any emotional investment into the characters, and it was just, it really just, after the 2 hours were over, it felt very pointless because I don't know, if they saved the world, if they, rescued somebody's daughter. I don't know what happened. It's like I really cannot describe. It's one of those movies that after I finished it, I was like, what did I just watch? Because without, especially also, the title had nothing to do with the film. It's like it was something that, Ronin is like a samurai without a master, but I don't really see how that applied to the story either, because it was just like it was all just nonsensical. And it's very important to me, if you know me at all, or if you've read any of my work up to this point, you know that it's important to me that things make sense, that the title makes sense to the story, that the story makes sense in its own context. This is true in all the books I review, this is true in all the movies I watch, and it has to make sense. It has to follow. It's like it all has to fit into a certain logical framework, because that's how stories work, particularly how stories work. And when I can appreciate, I guess, the artisticness of trying to, just, I guess, I don't know, whatever you might call that, where they don't have any idea what they're chasing after, but it didn't work for me. And I remember reading a book, a fandom book that was kind of similar to me up to that point. Now, I grant that I did not finish the entire book, and of course, this being said, take this with a grain of salt. But the first half of the book, the character gets involved with, the events of the story, and it was halfway through the book, according to my Kindle, and I didn't know what was going on. It's like I didn't know, I understood the basics about the scenario, but not why it mattered. It's like it wasn't like we had a scale of who the bad guy was, of what we were trying to protect or accomplish. I also didn't know, the main character goes through a transformation, like a physical transformation, but it really wasn't dwelled on, I guess, in a way that I felt made the story make sense, or at least that it wasn't super important to the story. And I kind of think that if you're going to do something like that, it should have some influence on it. It was kind of, I guess, played for comedy, and I know the author has written a few books afterwards, but it just didn't make sense to me. At least insofar as by the middle of the book, if you asked me to describe what their goal was, what the end point of this novel was, um, I couldn't answer that. And that's part of the problem. It's the same problem with Ronin. It's like if you ask me what this is about, and I don't have an answer, that always bothers me. Up here, I have to know what this is about for me to read the story and understand what's going on. Because if you break down most stories, just if you look at any story in general, you can, at least in one sentence, kind of describe the basic gist. Now, obviously, that is a gross oversimplification of most plots, but that being said, for a blurb or something, you can describe a movie succinctly. It's like, the first Star Wars movie. It's like the rebels struggle against the Empire. It's like, that's just a couple of words, but it clearly demonstrates exactly what the whole thing is about. And of course, you get into more detail as you watch the movie and so on and so forth. But, in a brief, succinct description, that's what it is. And in the novel I'm working on, it's like polar bear is trying to protect his family. That's his goal, that's his motivation. The rest of the stuff is details. It's all plot relevant, it's all interesting, or at least I think it's interesting. And of course, it's always, it's been through a couple of tweaks as I've been working on it, but that's the basic core of it. Now, if you ask me to describe Ronin or this book that I'm talking about, that I don't think I actually did a review of, because it was before I started doing video reviews and after I stopped doing written reviews. But the point was that this book, when I reached the middle of it, it just was like, I don't know. It was just I couldn't understand what the end point was. But anyway, okay. The second thing, point number 2, is uninteresting or unlikable main characters. Now, I can't really specifically cite any instances that occur to me off the top of my head, but I'm not necessarily talking about anti-heroes either. But if you have a main character that is either, I guess, too Gary Stu or Mary Sue or too um too unlikable, it's going to be very hard to get me to want to spend any time with them. Because I mean, I can appreciate like quirky smart ass, I can appreciate a lot of things, like and you should do what you can to make your main characters distinctive. But in the case where they're just like rotten people, or that they're just not that interesting, it's very hard to get me to want to actually follow them for an entire novel. And it's like I'm trying to think of an example that I can use that really fits. But I mean, unfortunately, most of the time when I run into this sort of scenario, it's not something that I really tend to stick in my memory a lot, because it's just one of those things that just weakens the entire story to the point that it's mostly uninteresting. I mean, I guess I can say, and maybe this is a little bit of blasphemy or something from some people, but I remember trying to read the Redwall books, and I know that a lot of people like Brian Jacques, or Jacques, or however you say his last name, and I do apologize for probably mispronouncing it. But it's like, and not to say that they're all bad books, because I only read one, and it was called The Prose of Lutra, and it had something to do with like otters. And I just remember, and again, it's like if you really wanted me to get on a rant on the Redwall book I read, I could do that. But so the point is that I don't really remember caring that much about the characters or what was going on, and it was just kind of like nobody really stood out to me enough that I remember from this book, that it was like, other than remembering the reasons I disliked it. And while I remember finishing the book, if I don't even remember who the main character was supposed to be, I think that's a point against it. Because usually I can at least remember the main character, what the point of the book was, whether it's good or bad or something. But in this case, it was just the characters just all seemed very, I guess, background charactery, and I didn't remember any of the characters on either side of the good or evil scale that were of any interest to me that I can remember. Now, admittedly, this has also been quite some time since I've read the book, but I think that only speaks more to it, because there are books that I've read a long time ago, that long ago and earlier, that I remember the main characters. Like, I don't remember the main characters from these books. So take that as you will. Point 3, implausible developments. Like, I cannot stand when you've written yourself into a corner, or you've done something, or your main character does something that absolutely does not make sense in the world as I understand it. It's like I'd like to say, I think I have a pretty good grasp on human nature, on patterns of behavior, on how certain types of people act. And again, I don't necessarily agree with them, but there are certain things that people of certain types do, and there are. I mean, how to say this? Like, I think that people, for the most part, are usually pretty reasonable. They're usually reasonably logical to varying degrees on the slider, depending on what your character is, and they usually have a decent sense of self-preservation. And I'm going to say that in this particular case, that there are two instances that I'm going to point out, both of them towards the finale of the story, or at least I should say three, now that I think about it. But there was the movie, and I think this was something that was pointed out in some online videos. It was like Will Smith's version of the Omega Man. I forget what it was called, but in the end of the book, he blows himself up with a grenade. And from what I remember in the movie, it wasn't really necessary for him to do that. He could have just left the explosive and survived. But he just chose to sacrifice himself, and I don't really recall if there was a reason why that was a thing. I mean, if there wasn't any option, then that would have made sense. But it's just like, why? It's counterintuitive, and I don't really recall there being like an emotional reason for him to want to do that either. I've fought enough, or that sort of thing. And maybe I don't know if that's a great example because I admittedly don't recall the movie, but I do recall that being discussed, or at least I think I recall that being discussed as one of those things that just he could have just left, and there really was no explanation, movie wise, as far as why that had to be the case. Um, but in the case of a couple of the books I've read, and both of these were things that occurred very close to the end. But it's like in one of these books, the characters are trying to accomplish a goal, which they do, but one of the characters involved decides to put themselves in danger for no reason that I can understand, because there's literally no reason for them to do this. They just put themselves in danger and get hurt because of it, but there was no reason that I could see that would cause any logical person or creature or anything to do this. It was just, you were safe. You were in a decent place. There was nobody that nobody in particular that mattered to you that was in danger, but instead you decided to just get into the mix of things when it wasn't really necessary. There was no point to it. There would have been no benefit to it, and you weren't really making any difference to the story plot, or even you weren't helping any other characters in particular. You were just getting into a fight just for no particular reason, and it caused an injury, which made no sense to me. It's just, if you're trying to protect somebody, okay, it's like but there has to be that logical reason that causes somebody to toss away self-preservation to do something dangerous, and this did not exist here. And it just was like, it was a nonsensical act that to me was done just so that the next thing in the plot could happen, rather than in a way that would make sense to an objective analyst. And that kind of thing just always drives me crazy. It's like, why did they do that? It's like, if I can't if you're watching like a movie and a character does something, it usually has to make some sort of sense based on what you've known so far. And if it doesn't, and you're finding yourself asking, why did they do that? It's like, that is one of those things that maybe it's, an editing thing or something, but there needs to be a reason why characters do what they do. And I always say that, and I try to make it happen in all of my books, in all of my stories. It's just like, whatever the characters do, it has to make some sort of sense based on the logic that you've presented to the story. If there is no reason why a person in that situation, why the average person in that situation would do that, it's like, you really need to provide a reason. And if there isn't one, then it occurs to my brain, because it expects a certain input. And when it's like, this person does something and there's no reason for it, it's like, why did they do that? And it starts making me question it, and it breaks the the suspension of disbelief. And the other thing that I want to talk about with this particular point is that there was a book I read in which the finale was entirely dependent on a character that appears at the very end of the story doing something in order to result in a happy ending. And if this character wasn't here, or if this character didn't choose to intervene, then the story ends on a negative note. And while that would be a valid creative choice if that were to happen, the problem that I have with that is that, characters that literally appear at the 11th hour and save the day is just, it's very close to Deus Ex Machina, in that there was no setup for this, there is no justification for this. It's kind of like when you solve an argument by saying, because I said so. And that's really kind of what it feels like. It's like, you didn't actually have an argument, you didn't have a logic behind it, you don't really have a justification for why it's the case. And then all of a sudden this new character shows up, saves the day, and it's just like, well, what was the rest of the characters even for then? It's like, it takes away the agency of your main character, for one thing, because your main character, if what they are doing does not affect the climax of the story, then it really kind of defeats the purpose of them being the main character. The main character, it's supposed to be their story. However many characters you have, whatever cast size you have, the story usually centers around one flagship character. And if this character, if they have no ultimate impact on the end of the story, it just defeats the entire purpose of why they are the main character. And also, it just bothers me when, you get to the end of a story and somebody new shows up that you've never met before and just saves the day, however it's worked into the story. And it just reeks of, you know, I don't know, it's just of literally random chance, I guess, because or just something else. It just feels like a cheap out, I guess. Because, nothing your main characters or your antagonists have done in the example I'm talking about, would have mattered because this character, this third party, comes in out of nowhere and saves the day. Well, why did we need any of you? It just, I don't know. It just seems like it doesn't attribute any agency to either the antagonist or the protagonist. It's like, the end of your story is entirely dependent on character X who just showed up, did his thing, and now everything's okay. And it doesn't feel like that's a genuine resolution to things because your main character hasn't done anything to make this happen. Your antagonists aren't really going to be satisfied with what happens, and your audience is just going to be, or at least in the case of me, it's just going to be like, I just don't feel like this satisfies the ending. It's like you brought this character in from nowhere to just save the day, and then that's it. I mean, sure, there are ways to make last minute cameos work, but usually the only time that they really work is when they're characters that you already know that are coming back to return to the story rather than a new character that you've never met before, who has little to no backstory, who has little to no depth to them, and just does something that any person in that same position could have done. And it bothers me. It's like it's important to me. I mean, this is one of those things that helps me get through the day, um, knowing that, reminding myself that, there's only one you, that you make a difference, that whatever it is that you contribute to the universe, that you're the only one that can do that, and that it matters because it comes from you. And if that being the case, everybody does matters. And that being said, it kind of also just points to the fact that if you have your character X come in and save the day, that it sort of takes away from the value of that from both from all of the other characters that you spent the entire book with. And it just feels like in this sort of scenario that it sort of, I guess, reduces the contributions that they've made, and I think that is just not a good way to do it. It's like I don't like those kinds of stories where somebody at the last moment comes in, saves the day, and they just came out of nowhere and just leave just as quickly. And it's just I don't it just doesn't work for me. I mean, point number four, kind of has, I guess, a little bit of combination of some of those other points, but it's like failure to make me invested in your world. It's like, when I start reading a book, I usually give one quarter about to halfway before I decide if this book is worth my time or whether or not it would be better served reading somebody else's work. And one of the things that's important to me is that the world catches me right away, that it interests me, that it's an interesting setting, an interesting story, an interesting approach, that, it all excites me with the possibilities. And, in the case of where, you don't make me invested in your world, it's just, it's like if my mind doesn't start thinking, it's like, what other possibilities are there? It's like, this is a world I'd want to live in. This is a world I'd want to check out. It's like, then it just, it's like that. It's a necessary part to build a good story. And especially if you want to build a complicated story where there's like multiple books or movies or television series. It's like, my off-cited examples like Star Trek, it's like, it's take it what you will. Some series are better than others, some series people like better than others, and that's of course a matter of opinion. A lot of them are different approaches for different creative teams at different times, so they're all going to hit people differently. But the point is that it's always an interesting universe because they're always trying to find new stories to tell, new characters, new different scenarios that didn't pop up before. And it gets credit if for only the fact that they're trying new things, that they're trying different things, that it's an interesting world that people want to be in. And I think that's our responsibility as writers, as creators, as video makers, as video game designers, as musicians. It's like you want people to be invested in what you're putting out there, and I think that's important. And while how to do that is of course up to each individual person, there are a lot of different ways. It's like I find that if the story creates a compelling narrative, that's something that I want to be a part of. But if it's just, I don't know, I mean, some things, like, they don't hit me the same way. But it's like Battlestar Galactica, the 2004 version. It's like I initially was hesitant to even watch it because I was remembering the original Battlestar, but my partner convinced me to watch it, and I've never been happier to be wrong. Because when I watched the new Battlestar, it was just such a compelling story and such a compelling world that it is probably like my all-time favorite sci-fi series. And it's really, really, surprising to say that it's like, I mean, it's not, it's like, I don't know how, it's not like I couldn't really say that, it's better than Star Trek because, people know that I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But Battlestar just reaches some heights that Star Trek was never able to achieve. And part of that is due to the direction of Ronald D. Moore, because he's a brilliant writer and a very talented filmmaker, and somebody I think Star Trek should have leaned into hard in the 90s. But, that's that. But, I mean, insofar as that's concerned, it's like, Star Trek is a great optimistic future. Battlestar is a great, post-apocalyptic sci-fi. But the point is that it's like it makes you invested right away in Battlestar, because it's just like all of a sudden you're interested in this fight for survival and how it relates to technology and us. And Star Trek is like, it's a compelling narrative about a future where we're all working together towards the same goal, where people are actually interested in caring about others, about things like that. And in the case of, like, I'm going to cite Ready Player One, because I remember watching this movie and it wasn't, I didn't hate it. It's like, I know I watched it and it was okay, but I don't ever recall thinking, oh man, this is a world I want to be a part of. And I don't know what it was missing or what was lacking in it. And I know there are, like, some people that have issues with it, and I think maybe the author, I don't know, but I just remember that the universe, the world, just did not seem compelling to me. So it wasn't like, after I saw Ready Player One, I never had the urge to go, like, invest any further into it. And it was just, eh. I mean, it's something that if it, I think there is supposed to be a Ready Player Two, there may be a book, maybe also a movie, but it's not something that I would necessarily pursue with any energy of my own. And it's just because, from what I don't really recall anything that was compelling, and it had some elements there that were interesting, but there was nothing that really said, this is a world I'd want to see more of. It's like when we think about Firefly, it's like Firefly, it's like it's a very interesting universe. It's a different sci-fi. I've been a Firefly fan for a long time, but it's like they do a real good job making an interesting, nuanced universe that kind of has all these different layers to it. And it's all very far from the seat of power. You never really see like the upper levels of anything like that. It's I remember it was once described as the people that the Enterprise would have blown right past, and it's like it's really is true. But it's also the fact that in a lot of these cases, Star Trek, Firefly, Battlestar, it's like they're all very compelling with compelling characters, strong narratives. And Ready Player One, I just felt did not have that, and it was a decent movie. It was worth a watch, but it wasn't anything unique that said to me, "This is the world I want to see more possibilities from." And that just is one of those things that really will make me stop checking out a book or a movie. And the last point, and I'm going to try and be brief about this because it's already apparently been like 30 minutes that I've been talking about this, but general incomprehensibility. And it impresses me that that's actually a word, because it's a long word, and one that I just discovered today is actually kind of a word, because it was one of those things I typed and I was kind of like, it sounds like a word. I think I think it means what I think it means, but let me put it this way. Um, there are some books I have read, and I can think of at least two examples in relatively recent years that I have read that by the time I've made it, in one case 2 chapters in, and in one case halfway through the book, that I had no idea what the hell was going on. And I would have to say that in both of these cases, it was just the skill of the narrator was so far below acceptable or average that I would have just regarded it as something that they clearly do not have a lot of skill in, and maybe should have tried not to, tried to do something else. Because I don't know. I mean, both of these cases, these authors, it's like I remember reading these books and just not understanding, you know, it's like the information wasn't sticking in my brain. It's like, I don't know if the descriptions weren't clear or if they didn't talk about the right things, but it's like if you asked me to describe who the character was, what was happening, where they were, it's like it was very hard in both of these cases to describe that. And because I couldn't make sense of anything, I couldn't I couldn't ground any of the other elements. Like I didn't know, you know, point five kind of encompasses like all four of the previous points, because I didn't know what the main character's motivations were, because I think in both cases it wasn't clear what they were here for, what they were attempting to accomplish, or why they did what they did. The characters really didn't compel me to want to follow their adventures. The developments that were happening just sort of seemed like they weren't driven by what the characters did. And failure to make me invest in your world was a big problem with both of these, because it's just like I couldn't understand what the world even was presenting, so I couldn't determine if I should care, how I should care. And all this resulted in general incomprehensibility, because I just, after reading the second chapter of one book, I was just looking at it and I just couldn't understand what was going on. So I just said, you know what, I just can't get myself to read any further. And this other book is like I read halfway through, and I was at the midpoint, and I was just like, I still don't understand what the end goal is. It's like, what are we trying to do? And I think that by the middle of the book especially, it needs to be clear what the end goal is. Are we trying to destroy the Death Star? Are we trying to save the world? Are we trying to cure the plague? It's like, what is the whole point of what we're doing? But and of course, there are other things, but I mean, those are the five big ones. Those are the five things that if I notice any of them while I'm reading, that's usually a reason why, this book or this movie or just whatever is not going to make it on my list of recommendations, and it's not going to be one of those things that I regard highly of. And it's just something that I would suggest that, it's like if you notice this sort of thing, it's like try to avoid them, if at all possible, because they just get very, very, very complicated. And I think it's gonna, in the long run, affect the kind of work you put out, and the kind of work that kind of movies, kind of. I mean, it's just when I run into these things, it just makes it very hard to be invested, to recommend, to want to, and I know we all, want to put out good work and watch good movies and so on and so forth. And, it's like if you're doing anything creative and these things are a problem, it's something to hopefully be worked out in the outline stage. And, you know, um, but those are a couple of things as to why what causes me to lose interest or to just have a very hard time getting through certain pieces. And I mean, hopefully this has been educational and interesting to you. And next we'll see what else I can come up with that will be hopefully worth sharing. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you found this informative.
If you like werewolves, check out my book Blue Moon, available in paperback and ebook on Amazon. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Catch you later.